How's it going, everybody? Antonio here for some resource talks. I'm about to show you a clip from my conversation with Doomberg, where he gave me his opinion on the banking crisis and the coming recession, as well as the effect that recession in the US might have on other parts of the world, like Europe, like the BRICS nations, and so on. We even talked about a commodity-backed currency and what that might look like, whether there's a need for it or not. Now, this is the first clip from the conversation. I'll publish other clips from this conversation probably as well, because we talked for over an hour and he gave me his opinion on many important topics, again ranging from de-dollarization to stuff like electric vehicles, other commodity, other energy issues, as well as the commodities that he's bullish and not so bullish on, and so on. So I think those are worth highlighting on this platform as well, and more clips from this resource talks will likely follow. If you do want to listen to the whole thing in one sitting, though, I share those on resource talks, on the resource talks Discord server. It's a free platform. It's available to everybody, so you don't even have to be a Discord user to play or download the conversations. You can just go to resourcetalks.com, scroll down to the early tabs, the interviews, and you're going to find them there. And it's called early tabs, early interviews, because I share the full talks I share on there much earlier than I do on here. So yeah, feel free to check that out if you care, or don't if you don't. But for now, I'll play the intro song and let Doomberg speak. Let's say we get on a plane. I don't know if chickens like flying, but let's say we get on a plane and we get 40,000 feet up in the air. We look down at the global economy and geopolitics through your lens. What would we see?
Top of mind for us today is perhaps an underestimation of the consequences of the ongoing banking crisis in the United States and the potential near-term macroeconomic impact that might have. And if I were to summarize it in the simplest terms, when depositors flee small banks stop lending. Small banks are responsible for not only a significant portion of lending in the United States economy, but also a particularly important subset of lending, i.e. to small businesses. And what we're seeing right now is, as a consequence of the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank and Silvergate and the struggles of First Republic, there is a recalibration amongst small businesses and nonprofits and other people who use community banks around their treasury management, and whether it's wise to have any amount of money above FDIC insurance limits at any bank not considered too big to fail. And as a consequence of that, tens of billions of dollars are flowing out of such institutions. And as a consequence, those institutions can't lend. And we're seeing a credit crunch begin to develop in the US. And this is only going to serve to augment sort of a cancer is growing in the economy around commercial real estate and the auto sector. And so we believe, absent some significant intervention soon, that the U.S. Economy is going to go through a particularly difficult period. And this is all being made worse by the recent actions of OPEC Plus in an affront to the Biden administration. There's no other way to say it. The cutting of production by OPEC Plus is causing energy prices to become more elevated. And that, of course, is also a headwind to the economy. And so we think that the market is underpricing the potential for a significant recession / financial crisis, and that we would be in defensive mode here.
It's interesting you should say that market is not taking this banking issue seriously enough, because I think the day after it happened, I spoke to Joseph Wang, the Fed guy 12 or something like that on Twitter. I'm sure you're aware of him.
Mm-hmm.
He told me that the current issues were not a problem, and I have my notes here, because they're not sector specific. They were just one bad company that was run badly, and there's no contagion risk. Why is that not how you see things?
So I can give you a couple of anecdotes and then point you to some recent data, which is quite troubling. So I'm a small business owner, and we bank at a community bank. And we do so because we have a person, and that person is quite effective for us. And we are considering our our treasury, whereas before we would leave, funds in excess of FDIC limits without worrying about it because the bank is pretty sound and so on. And then I have a few things that I volunteer in and serve on sort of the finance committee of, and that those people are also doing the same and pulling money out of such banks, and perhaps opening up a Treasury Direct account so they could buy T-bills directly, and or opening up a brokerage account and investing such things in securities, because the insurance particularities around brokerage accounts are a little different than banks and offer you some flexibility. And then the numbers are also showing it. I mean, the amount of deposit outflow from small banks is relatively historic in the past few weeks. And as a consequence, we're beginning to see the beginnings of a credit crunch, i.e., new loan creation is collapsing. And this is all coming at a time where there is a significant amount of commercial real estate that needs to be refinanced between now and 2025. And so you sort of have the beginnings of a perfect storm brewing. Look, it's Doomberg. This is the kind of thing that we like to get ahead of and be afraid of. But literally, the Dallas Fed's latest banking conditions survey, as reported by Zero Hedge, of course, shows that basically the 2-week drop in U.S. loans and leases is historic, and I don't think this is being properly priced in. And of course, it makes perfect sense. If you have deposit outflow, you can't underwrite loans. This is the whole, unlike the too big to fail banks, the thousands of community and regional banks actually do traditional banking, which is they, take in deposits and then they write loans against those deposits. And when they lose those deposits, they have to stop writing loans as the first response. And hopefully they weather the storm of the deposit outflow and a run doesn't occur. But we shall see. This is, if you ask me again, for the 40,000 foot view that few people are talking about, between that and the sort of auto loan market, we're beginning to see sort of subprime is contained type responses when we think that perhaps subprime is not contained.
So when you say a recession might be, is that an inflationary recession that you see? So it's sort of a stagflationary environment, or is it a different type of recession?
Yeah, I think it's stagflationary environment, which is something we have been observing and calling for the better part of a year, and I think we're going to see it. Yeah, with oil at $85 a barrel, and credit lending collapsing, you have the ingredients for stagflation for sure.
I feel like most people I talk to, and most of the data that I find on myself, although it's most of the time it's pretty hard for me to understand, it's leading to that answer. So I was hoping to speak to somebody who can tell me, hey, there's this other thing that could also happen. What could be another thing? Like if you're wrong on stagflation, what is the second best in role that could happen?
I suppose we could just have outright inflation and decent nominal growth. But because ultimately, the vaunted Fed pivot, they come in and flush the system with liquidity, which of course ultimately becomes, harder and harder to push on a longer and longer rope. But there might be a few more cycles left before we see sort of the grand finale, the debt jubilee, as people have described it. Yeah. And ultimately, it's just a matter of if and not when such response occurs. But if you're just taking a cold look at the sort of macroeconomic data as it's rolling in, if I would have told you that there would be a deposit outflow from small banks, then the next thing that you would expect is that small banks will stop lending. And when small banks stop lending, the economy doesn't grow. And so we are seeing the second part of that. And then our call is that soon we will see the third, which is growth will surprise to the downside, might even flip negative. Banks play a critically important role in the economy, and the too big to fail banks make money because they're too big to fail. And the rest of the banks actually have to do the hard practice of banking, which of course is nothing but a confidence scheme. And to the extent that confidence is disrupted, what follows is economic contraction. And the market doesn't seem to be pricing in economic contraction, but what do we know? It could be that in a period of stagflation, the stocks go up. We have no idea how stocks will handle, but from an economic perspective, I can tell you that anecdotally in the data, both support a sea change as a consequence of, prior to the recent outbreak of sort of high-profile bank failures, nobody really pondered the sanctity of their deposits. And of course, these things come in cycles. But even beyond that, with money market rates between 3 to 5% and bank deposits paying hardly anything, if nothing else, this sort of mini crisis has awoken people's eyes to the fact that they could be getting a better yield on their cash. So back to my original point around treasury and cash management, security is job one, but once you sort of open that box, then the next question becomes, well, what could we do to get good yield? And the answer is to move your money to a brokerage account and buy T-bills, or to buy, money market funds, or spread your certificates of deposits around various banks so that you stay under the FDIC limits. Well, all of these things were nothing to consider when, Fed interest rates were zero and you couldn't get a yield anywhere. You just left your money in a bank and didn't think about it. Well, the spike in interest rates and then the crisis have converged and sharpened people's minds around, I'm not getting enough yield on my cash. So while I'm also going to yank anything above FDIC limits out of these small banks, I'm also going to go and seek yield, which is higher outside of the banking system. And all of that is feeding the credit crunch, which is being underreported. In our view, look, there's lots of people reporting it. We had Danielle Diamantino Booth on the Doomberg Pro Doom Zoom last month, and she went through a 30-slide presentation calling for a recession that was pretty compelling to us. And many of the things we're looking at now and pondering flow directly from her work, which is brilliant, and people should sign up for it. And she's really great and a good friend. And so, these aren't original thoughts. These are the convergence of smart people that we read and distilling our own views onto them.
I'd love to talk to Danielle, so I might harass you a little bit after this to give me her email address or put me in touch with her.
I can hook you up via Twitter DM, no problem.
Awesome. Doom Zoom. What a name. That's a place you want to be. Like, that's a thing that sells immediately. Well,
yes, this is for our pro tier subscribers who pay a little extra to not only have our articles, but also to get a monthly Doom Zoom where they get an open Q&A with either us directly if we're making the pitch, or with our invited guests, in this case, like DiMartino Booth. And so people enjoy the opportunity to have an open Q&A with such great thinkers as her.
I can imagine. What's the magnitude of what you're expecting here in terms of a correction? Is this going to be more like 08, 01, something even before that?
So that's a good question. One has to hesitate to sort of call crises, in advance. At a minimum, we expect, and it is our view, that the market is radically underestimating the coming credit crunch. And that alone is worth pondering. Now, whether the Feds will allow the cancer to metastasize to the point where we get a full-blown crisis remains to be seen, although their language has not changed. and the real test will be the response to sort of crashing federal tax receipts, for example. I was just thinking here, I listened to a podcast on the Grant Williams show. Julian Brigden was on, and he had a fascinating analogy, which is he was reminded of the 08-09 financial crisis, in between when Bear Stearns failed and Lehman Brothers failed. He characterized that as sort of the pulling of the pin on a grenade, and it had not yet gone off, and everybody assumed like, oh, okay, we're out of the woods. And then when Lehman Brothers failed, the grenade exploded, and people were in fact not out of the woods. And his point on that podcast, and one that we would concur with, is it certainly has that same feeling where we've pulled the pin on the grenade, and it has not yet gone off, and we're all thinking to ourselves, oh, everything is fine. We shall see.
I spoke to who was it? Must have been Peter Greenwich, and he told me that if you take the top guys at Wall Street, although he didn't recommend doing that, but he said you take them, you throw them off a building, halfway down a building, they will say, "Hey, so far so good."
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Sorry for stealing his line, but it's a good line. Is there going to be contagion? Is this a U.S. centric thing, or because of how the OECD world, I guess, is structured? Would there be contagion to us in Europe over here as well?
It's hard to imagine a world that has robust economic growth when the U.S. is struggling. So I would imagine that at least second order would be an issue. Of course, Europe is not out of the woods itself and is dealing with the aftershocks of the energy crisis of 2022, 23, and has its own set of issues. It was fascinating to watch, Macron over in China this week and the treatment he was given and the sheer volume of business leaders he had with him on the plane. And that sort of gives you an idea as to what his true intent was in taking that trip. And so, yeah, I think in a world where the U.S. contracts sharply, it's hard to imagine that global growth is robust.
Is there a country that, like on the world level, is there a country that you like, that you think is handling things well at the time?
I would say the country that is acting in its interest with the most independence today is probably India. Now, I would say admire is a different word than I would use, but I do acknowledge, we would acknowledge that at a minimum, the leaders of India seem to be optimizing for the people of India as they navigate the complexities of the proxy war between Russia and the United States in particular. And what we in the US would consider to be, violating the sanctions, India has openly said is optimizing for their population. And so India has probably, played this economic crisis that has, been exacerbated by Putin's foolish adventures in Ukraine. I would say that the leaders of India have threaded the needle quite effectively. And so that's sort of what immediately jumped into my mind when you asked the question.
Yeah, it seems that they're also trying to triple their nuclear capacity. They announced 10 new reactors last week, despite Leo DiCaprio going there and doing his best effort not to mention nuclear not once in the whole movie. Still kind of angry about it.
Yeah.
BRICS is India is figuratively and literally, I guess, in the middle of BRICS, and I'm not hearing much about de-dollarization and a potential new reserve currency, commodity-backed BRICS currency and stuff like that is that I'm reading and hearing a lot about. Is that something you subscribe? Like, what is your view on that whole thing?
We look at the de-dollarization phenomenon with some interest. Of course, we, like many others, observe the Twitter arguments between Brett Johnson and Luke Gromen, and we like both of them and are still trying to figure out what they're disagreeing on many times as we watch them go back and forth on Twitter. I would say that US dollar hegemony is being challenged. It has been challenged historically several times with minimal impact on its status. And one wonders whether this time is different. There are certainly aspects of the news flow that feel different in the in the era after which Russian reserves were seized by the Western world. That is certainly a new move on the chessboard that makes this time potentially different. China is aggressively trying to create its own sphere of influence with some success. I would say it is a fascinating milestone that China was able to structure at least a détente, if not a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And concurrent with that, suddenly we see Saudi Arabia making noise about ending the war in Yemen. And so I think that this effort is more serious than past efforts. That doesn't mean that the quote demise of the US dollar is imminent or even likely. So you'll notice that we've not really written that extensively about the demise of the US dollar. We wrote about it peripherally in a piece that we called Gold in Handcuffs, where we told the gold community, of which we have many subscribers, that be careful what you wish for, because in a world where gold is at the center of a true challenger to the US dollar, then the US government will just simply outlaw the private ownership of gold again. And the precedents that are being set by what Nick Carter has called Operation Choke Point 2.0, i.e. the crackdown on the crypto world, those precedents could very easily be turned against gold owners. And in a world where gold plays a critical role in settling trade balances between countries that are creating a new currency backed at least in part by gold, gold would then become sort of target of U.S. propaganda, and law-abiding citizens would have to choose between turning in their gold for some nominal fiat fee or breaking the law. And we would turn in our gold because we are participants in the U.S. fiat system and we are law-abiding citizens. And if the U.S. outlaws the private ownership of gold, well, we would follow the law. Many might not. Many might assume that they could hoard it or, or hide it from the government, and that's fine. And that would be people's, within everyone's decision framework to do that. But there is a world in which, gold is being used by the challengers to the U.S. dollar, perhaps even effectively. And in that world, do not rule out the Eye of Sauron striking back. And so that's the only time we've ever really referenced the BRICS de-dollarization phenomenon in our pieces. And it's mostly because we don't have a strong opinion on the matter. We are observing. We are interested. The headlines are interesting, but they have been sort of similar headlines in the past that didn't really amount to much. And then if you just look at the raw data, the dollar market share in global international trade is basically unchanged in the past 20 years, despite all of these efforts and desires for the BRICS of the world to create an alternative.